The official Locked On NBA Top 100 Players is out. Where are the Pacers players? Do I think it's fair? I actually participated, so I can very easily answer that. Who's going to rise? Who's going to fall? And what does this reveal about me? We have a lot to get to on today's Locked On Pacers podcast.
You are Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? Happy Tuesday, and welcome into another edition of the Locked On Pacers podcast, where we, of course, talk about the Indiana Pacers. As always, my name's Tony East. I cover the team for Forbes, and today, the official Locked On NBA Top 100 player list is done. Me and all the other hosts for every other team ranked our top 100 players in the league. We compiled all the lists, did the averages. We have our Locked On Top 100. I usually don't love top 100s and talking about other people's opinions on them because there's like a billion of them, but it's way more fun when you're involved and you can see how the sausage is made and where your own rankings stack up compared to your colleagues. And of course, we're talking about the Pacers players today. Do I think their rankings are fair? Do I think that my colleagues are stupid? Two big holes in this exercise that I think hurt the Pacers in some cases, and who's going to rise and fall when we do this next year. Really fun to dive into this. And of course, we made graphics. So if you're watching on YouTube, you can see on the screen, there's the top 10. Tyrese Haliburton's not in it. He is the highest rated Pacer. He came in at 13th in our Locked On NBA Top 100. And I will, by the way, I have all my own stuff. I have my own deltas of my biggest differences in the whole league. I had Tyrese Haliburton at 10. I had him in the top 10. I thought he might make it after the playoff run that the Pacers just had. He is 13th. Here's where I think there's a hole in our process is this is supposed to be designed to look ahead to next season, just the regular season. And we were told to ignore injuries, pretend like everyone's healthy and you're getting about you'd expect from them normally in a season. What is intended by that is like Zion Williamson and Joel Embiid. You're assuming they're healthy right now, but like they're going to miss games. Whereas like guys with torn Achilles, and Haliburton has had some injury history, but like Tatum very rarely missed time, for example. Like assume fully healthy Jason Tatum. So I think that was kind of cloudy in a lot of these cases. Like Damian Lillard's rankings a little goofy. And I think that you'll catch on to something that I thematically realized throughout this exercise. And that is that because this is a regular season projection, playoff performance and successes kind of don't feel like they get weighed enough, right? Like, let me pull up the top 10 again. Like Tyrese Haliburton's not on here. You'll see Jalen Brunson at 8 and Donovan Mitchell at 9. They both like made a higher All-NBA team than Haliburton last year. They both had a good playoffs last year. And yet I'm like, Haliburton beat them both, right? He beat Brunson 2 years in a row, right? And so I understand how this lands the way it does, but I also understand why my ranking sits differently. I had Donovan Mitchell at 13 and Jalen Brunson at 14. And I don't even mean that as disrespect to those players. It's just how I feel about them. I think Haliburton's better than them and on bigger stages has been. I do understand how the regular season part of this can stack up the way it does, but Haliburton comes in at 13. If you're looking on the graphic now, he's right between LeBron and Anthony Davis for us. Pascal Siakam, of course, the next Pacer, coming in at 22nd, sandwiched right between Jaylen Brown and Paolo Banchero. I can't lie. I did not expect him to finish this high in these proceedings. I had him in a tier that I actually had a lot of trouble with, which was like these, clearly we're all-star level players last year, but how do you actually decipher who is I had this tier starting for me personally right after Jaren Jackson Jr., and it's really long. It was basically every player between James Harden and Darius Garland on my own list from 22 to 32. Siakam, I put at 30. And I actually debated putting him at 25 right after I put Jaylen Brown down. And then I just all of a sudden was flowing through and I put 30 for Siakam. And he goes 22, higher than I put him, right? And I think that it's possible that I'm too low on him in this exercise. He just kicked a bunch of dudes' butts in the postseason. What makes me feel like that this is on me being too low, and I like people are going to listen to this and be like, how are you too low on Siakam? You watch him all the time. I don't know what happened for me really here because his defense got so much better last season and was terrific in the playoffs in a way that like he finished the season during the season, he made an all-star team, right? And I think he was probably one of the 4 or 5 last All-Stars put on the team, as in like the pedigree of their season. Pascal Siakam was, the 20th best player or 25th at the time. And that, of course, does not include players who were injured and not eligible for All-Star. And like Haliburton obviously wasn't an All-Star and was hurt and stuff. So like that's roughly the 25th to 30th best player in the league. And that's probably where he finished the season at. But he had a great playoffs and showed more on defense and continues to show that he can hold this level at his age. So I probably should have had him higher. I definitely should have had him above. The only player that I'm like absolutely certain that I flubbed my ranking on here is Trae Young, who I have one spot in front of him at 29. Pascal Siakam's better than Trae Young, but there's this long tier of like obviously very good in the All-NBA mix, in the All-Star mix every year guys, and Siakam's in it. And I think he got the respect he deserved last year remember like a year ago, he signed a 4-year max, and I didn't say this, but a lot of people were saying, this might be a bad contract. This is going to age poorly. And then he's an All-Star in the first year, and he's in the All-NBA mix, and he's the second best player on a finals team, and very frequently leading the Pacers to postseason wins. And again, the postseason part of this, maybe this was on me. I didn't index the postseason enough. I didn't index his defense enough. 22nd for Pascal Siakam. Pacers player number 3 on this list goes to Andrew Nembhard at 71. Oof. 71. This will make a lot of many of you watching on YouTube probably get a kick out of seeing who is put at 72 and 76. If you're just listening, it is Miles Turner at 72 and Paul George at 76 with Nembhard in front of both of them. Fair-ish, good starter range. This makes sense to me. My disclosure would be that I had Andrew Nembhard at 68 in this tier of like good offensive players who are great on defense, as I have it, as Jaden McDaniels, Jalen Suggs, Denny Avdia, Andrew Nembhard, Miles Turner. We're in a grouping of 5 for me personally. And this is, I think, where Nembhard belongs, in a playoff riser type. Really good player, clear starter, would start on basically every team. Actually, no, would start on every team in the league. Elite defender, emerging offensive player. And, oh boy, you're going to hear a lot about Andrew Nembhard more when we get to the risers and fallers category for the Pacers, but certainly a deserved spot for him. Like he was like creeping into these spots last year, right? When other people did top 100 lists that I didn't participate in. And that was after he had a great playoffs and hit huge shots against the Knicks and was like, oh, he's actually good and not just some, emerging young player. And now he's firmly on these and continues to climb. And there's a chance that is he going to be like 50th next year? But a lot of people, like I got this comment on YouTube a few days ago about like, was Andrew Nembhard secretly the Pacers' 3rd best player last year? And I'll admit I had that thought at times and even said it to other people. And like him and Turner were neck and neck a lot of the times. I probably would have had Turner for most of the season, but in the playoffs, Nembhard was certainly better. And the rankings say people believe Nembhard is better than Turner. 1 spot ahead again in the rankings. The final Pacer in this top 100 exercise is, of course, Aaron Nesmith, who comes in at exactly number 90, right behind Bradley Beal, right behind a guy he outperformed in the 2nd round, DeAndre Hunter, right behind a guy he outperformed in the 3rd round in Josh Hart. Alas. Aaron Nesmith, good season. This is his first time in the years of top 100 exercises that everybody does, making it onto these lists. Well-deserved, obviously, and you'll never guess, but I had him higher than my colleagues. I had him 80th, actually. A delta of 10 in my favor was one of the highest for any player that I had. And you will catch a theme of the Aaron Nesmith, Andrew Nembhard vote types with me when we get to who I was higher on than everybody else. But there's some players that I'm like, wait, are you guys for real about this? Like Norm Powell finished 60th for us. I really like Norm Powell. I was advocating on Locked On NBA during the season that he might be in the All-Star mix for the Clippers. He's a good scorer. He's a good player. Norm Powell's 30 spots. There's Norm Powell at 60 if you're watching on YouTube. 30 spots ahead of Aaron Nesmith. What? Not valued enough the defensive work Aaron Nesmith has. They put him on Jalen Brunson on purpose in the Eastern Conference Finals. He's that level of defender on the perimeter. If he was just a little taller, he'd be way higher on these lists. They asked me to do the short video for the big production on him and specifically what it would take for him to climb ahead of a lot of these wings in front of him. I thought his ranking would end up being a little higher, honestly. He was awesome in the postseason. And that's what I think this is an interesting exercise for, is that the Pacers 2 years in a row have shown they have a team of guys who, like, with a specific game plan and with their random style and their system, all are playoff risers. And so they're really good, and they are routinely better on the biggest stage than a lot of these guys. But in a purely regular season exercise, it's hard to find the best spot for a lot of these Pacers players, right? Because they deserve to be, total package, if you consider the postseason, valued higher than a lot of their peers. But for what we were asked to do, it is a little different to think about it in that way. Whereas guys who turn into pumpkins in the playoffs, but are really good in the regular season, they don't get dinged for that. It doesn't seem right to me, but alas, that was part of the problem. For a reference, by the way, I had Nesmith 80. I voted DeAndre Hunter 85, Josh Hart 84, right? Devin Vassell 83. These are players I like that I think Nesmith had a straight up is better than, right? That I think will be more valuable than those players this season. And I might be clouded the other direction by him being better than some of those guys in the playoffs last year in head-to-head situations. Alas, that's where he was. No other Pacer player was nominated or on our voting list, and we'll talk about that later. But those 4 in the top 100, who's going to rise and fall next year? When we do this again, are these fair after the playoffs last year? What does my own voting patterns reveal about me? So much more to get to on today's Locked On Pacers podcast. Before we get to any of that, we got to talk about FanDuel. The NFL season is here. The Colts are awesome in week 1, and FanDuel's making sure you're ready for kickoff every single week with can't miss offers. Right now, if you're a new customer on FanDuel, you can bet just $5 if your bet wins. How about this? $300 in bonus bets to use across the app any way you want. So many people love using FanDuel because it fits how they like to bet. Player props, so they got them. Building same game parlays, very popular. They can do that. Even jumping in live as the action unfolds. It makes every game more exciting, whether you're watching your team or just keeping an eye on your fantasy lineup and players. FanDuel makes it quick, easy. It's the best way to add a little more energy into your NFL Sundays. So are you ready to play? Download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. We're back here on Locked On Pacers. Thanks for making it your first listen today and every single day. Your second listen, Locked On Clippers, of course, for the latest on the Kawhi Leonard saga. My initial take was that I thought it might be a little hard for this to be a heavy punishment because there's lots of deals signed with sponsors and players in the league, and who knows if they're going to be able to find a smoking gun. But the more I think about it, the more I listen about it, the more I wonder, there could be a punishment here for the Clippers. Locked On Clippers will have more on that. Let's keep rolling here. Our Locked On NBA Top 100 project. Every single team will be discussing where their player ranks. The Locked On NBA show, of course, has many breakdowns of this. Wes Goldberg and I'll probably talk about it tomorrow as well. Okay, so Obi Toppin wasn't eligible for this. I think if you get to the 100th itch players, which right now is Tumani Kamara, who I freaking love that dude, Anthony Simons, CJ McCollum, Nickeil Alexander-Walker, Peyton Pritchard were the last 5 guys. Toppin is like a super sub 6th man, can be the 5th starter kind of player. Yeah, that's about what you're seeing there. Is 6th man of the year. Peyton Pritchard's right there. He's probably a little behind those guys. I think it's fair that he's not in the top 100, but I think potentially he should be a guy that is listed for votes. They asked some of the hosts of crappy teams to just submit players that could be on here. We could vote for Sam Merrill and not Obi Toppin. That was dumb. Nobody voted for Sam Merrill, thankfully. So next year, I think possible Toppin's in the mix. McConnell, of course, had a great finals, but his minutes cap at his age, I think it's going to be hard for him to ever be considered a top 100 regular season player value. But Bennedict Mathurin is the obvious, this is a guy who could certainly be in these mixes next year. If you hear those names of the guys that just missed it, here are the guys who I did not vote for at all, but ended up making it on, which basically means they were right on the border for a lot of people of the top 100. Peyton Pritchard, Nikola Vucevic, Jalen Green, Emmanuel Quickley, and Stephon Castle were some of the best guys that I didn't put on. And I didn't vote for rookies at all because you just don't know, right? Ben Mathurin could get into that kind of tier. Ben Mathurin could get past that tier. He could get into the 90s. My final 5 players I voted for, again, we couldn't vote for Ben Mathurin. This is not a choice on my part, but my final 5 were RJ Barrett, Nickeil Alexander-Walker, Andrew Wiggins, Jakob Poeltl, and DeJounte Murray. It's totally possible Ben Mathurin gets to that level. And that's where the Pacers sit for this exercise. Next year, it's going to be really interesting, is guarantee Tyrese Haliburton falls, right? He's just not going to play. The lack of knowledge about and memory about what he's capable of will drop him. And of course, he's returning from a big injury. That's totally reasonable to me. Every other Pacer could maintain or even rise because they're all so young. Mathurin, of course, will have a big opportunity. Nembhard, of course, will have a big opportunity. And I kind of heard this framing with other teams Kirk Goldsberry and Zach Lowe were talking on the Zach Lowe show about the Celtics a little bit. They were doing a most improved player thing about, there's this, they called it the black hole of statistical production that is open. I think it was these two. I hope it was these two. If I'm misquoting who said this, I'm sorry. But the production hole that is created on the Celtics, and I thought about the Pacers all of a sudden, because obviously those two teams are linked by their star players tearing their Achilles, but also like both of these teams have significant starting lineup changes. No Miles Turner or Tyrese Haliburton in Indiana. And so you're losing that player and like someone slides into their role. And you have to replace those minutes and the stats. And I know everybody has said Ben Mathurin could up his scoring. I wrote about it. I talked about it. Like 20 points per game is totally possible for him with the usage coming his way. Nembhard could up his usage and scoring and all that. But like they were already playing a lot. Like it's not like their minutes are going to climb a ton. In Nembhard's case, maybe not at all. Someone on the Pacers are going to be playing way more, right? Way more. And I think the way you look at that part of it is Mathurin, if he goes from a 29-minute role to a 34-minute role, right? That's a little bit of a bump. But someone has to fill Mathurin's 29-minute role, right? That's where I think you'll see the big bump. And so I think the guy that's going to see the biggest bump in minutes, potentially, per game from last year's Jarris Walker. Perhaps it's Ben Shepherd, but I bet it's Jarris. And that's a guy who could naturally see his stats pop as a result. I'm not saying Jarris Walker is going to be a top 100 player at this time next year, although it's possible. But like if he's filling that void by being the guy who has the most bumped up things, watch out for him to be a riser and potentially be somebody in the mix for this next year. Whoever is balling, if the Pacers win more than 41 games next year and they're over 500 and they're in the playoffs again, whoever their good center is, maybe it's Jackson and Huff, but whoever their starting center is certainly going to be in contention for this. Most players, if you're a starter on a good team in this exercise, you were eligible to be voted for, right? VJ Edgecombe was eligible to be voted for. Some of this was very challenging. And so Jackson or Huff have the chance to be risers who are possible. But I think very obviously the guys the two, Mathurin and Nembhard in a lot of sports books, are both top 5 in most improved player odds. And I think that translates well to this project, that if they seize the opportunity in front of him, which for Nembhard is, oh, wow, this guy as a lead guard can run an offense, can score when needed, and can defend at a pretty high level at the same time, is like, oh, that's a top 50 player. Like that pairs, that's a good starter on most teams. That pairs well with Haliburton or other talented guards. Like that's a top 50 player if you have it. That's a 3-and-D guard, right? If the shooting comes. For Mathurin, it could be like, oh, he actually is a legitimate 20 points per game scorer. That's possible for him. He could be a number 1, number 2 option on whatever level of team the Pacers are next year. Like if he hits that kind of level, that is certainly, that is certainly a guy that would get into the mix for top 100 player conversations. And he could look really awesome if he's the leading scorer, right? Leading scorer on a good team. That could vault him up as well. And then Siakam, his role, like he's like a little Mathurin-y to me, where his role is going to change more so than his minutes. But if he's the number 1 option, which seems extremely obvious, and Carlisle on that podcast with Kalen Cooper talking about, he's going to be a big option closing games. Like if he has some moments, that could help him rise. And I already regret my placement of him, and I only have seen it for 10 days, right? So he could be a guy who could get to like 20, 21, 22 for everybody, and that would up his ranking slightly if he has a good season. And so it's interesting for the Pacers in that already a lot of their core guys, their rotation guys, are young, right, this coming season. Nembhard, Mathurin, both of their centers, although Huff's 28, I learned, not 26, like I've been saying all summer. Toppin's inexperienced, Furphy's young, Shepherd's young, Walker's young, Nesmith's young. Like, even without the who's going to take these stats, who's going to take these points kind of part of this, young guys just get better, and that gives them a chance to rise in these lists next year, even as other players come into the league. But the Pacers specifically, and Celtics players fit this bill too, which is what made me start thinking about this, have a unique chance to really rise in that their opportunities will be more in volume and potentially more in quality, depending on how the team plays. Obviously not more in quality in terms of the fact that like Tyrese Haliburton setting you up as high quality as it gets, right? I just mean like in a system for Mathurin where perhaps things are tweaked slightly in a way that is beneficial for him, or Andrew Nembhard, you are the lead ball handler, like your actual outlook and situation are different. Those are ways that could also boost things for some of these guys. And so I think it's definitely more possible for basically everybody that they are risers, not by more so that kind of force and inertia than actually like improving within the Pacers system. And that's fine. That's a good way to improve. They're thrust into a situation where improvement is really an ideal situation for the Pacers. If you ask me right now, though, who I think will be the guy that would rise the most, Mathurin seems like the most likely one. But I've also been so high on Andrew Nembhard for forever that he would, of course, have a good chance. But if the Pacers are good again without Haliburton and Turner, like all these guys are at least going to maintain, if not rise. And I hope next year we can include some playoff evaluation into this, because that is where I feel like the biggest problem for the Pacers rankings is they're really good playoff players, and they beat a lot of guys in front of them in the rankings in the postseason. And the assumption of health will be tricky for Haliburton at this time next year. What did my own voting tell me about me? This is very important, because I want to know if there's players that I maybe overrate or underrate given their skill sets, or if they were just at one point somebody that I actually cheered for when I was a fan of them in college. Let's talk about that to close out today's Locked On Pacers. We're back here on Locked On Pacers. Thanks for making us your first listen today and every single day. If you're interested in any players' rankings, including some of these ones that I clearly was way off the mark on, listen to their Locked On show, including my biggest difference, Joel Embiid, who we'll get to in a moment. Locked On Sixers could be a way to go. They're a fascinating team this year. If you told me they were awesome or awful, I'd be like, yep, totally get it. Okay, let's start with players that I had below their ranking spot by the most. 8+ points, as in pretend they finished 40th. I had them 48th or worse, for example. There are, I can't count. Well, if you include Siakam, who I apparently didn't type down, I did, excuse me. There are 11 players that fit this category for me. De'Aaron Fox, Chet Holmgren, Norm Powell, Josh Giddey, Aaron Gordon, which surprised me, Asar Thompson, Paolo Banchero, Domantas Sabonis, Zach LaVine, and Lou Dort, which also surprised me. Most of those guys fall into a category of really nice offensive player and not a lot of defense on them. Fox is an okay defender, but you could put Fox in there. You could put Norm Powell in there. You could put Giddey in there. You could put Banchero's an okay defender. You could put Sabonis in there. You could put LaVine in there. Those kind of players have never really been my tea, especially ones that are just like on that fringe of all-star where there's a lot of volume. De'Aaron Fox is really good. I was surprised I was 8 spots low on him. I think Chet's a very good player who's going to take on a lot more offensive role this year, but maybe he's a little overrated defensively just because of some bigger players can really move him off his spot. Asar Thompson, I think, is really good. Both Thompson twins are really good, but is their lack of shooting going to hold them back from really popping? Are they going to really emerge again for 2 years in a row? Banchero is amazing. I think he's going to be awesome, but his efficiency is certainly concerning. And Lou Dort is just awesome, but I guess I just had him in a different spot than everybody else. But I think that throughout this exercise, as we go to the other side of this list, and of course Siakam, you'll see that defense is something that apparently is something that a huge separator for me. And apparently another thing that's a huge separator for me is like a sustained past of stardom and not like flash in the pan 1 year kind of things. The only player that I don't understand how I had them so much lower than everybody else is Aaron Gordon. I'm surprised by that one. I believe I had him 50th and he finished 42nd or something. I had him 53rd. He finished 44th. Very good player. I'm like right there with the tier, but I didn't realize that I was so far off there. De'Aaron Fox finished 33rd. I had him 48th. That is very surprising to me in terms of his height. De'Aaron Fox is a good player, though. However, the other side of this list is much longer. There are actually 7 players that I personally ranked 20+ spots higher than anybody else that did this, which I guess is stunning isn't the right word, but that's a lot of spots. What happened there? Well, some of them are just like they are stars or have been stars and they stunk or had problems last year. And I ranked them more on their pedigree than their most recent season. So Joel Embiid, for example, is my biggest difference by far, right? Peak Joel Embiid 2 years ago, this dude won MVP. He obviously was not great last year. Injuries are scary for him. He finished 52nd. Be for real. If we're assuming health for voting, he's not going to be the 52nd best player. Obviously, in the average season, that's reasonable. Like his total impact could be 50th. If we assume health, which was the point of the voting, I put him 16th. I thought that was fine. Bradley Beal, I think in the new team he's on is going to be a nice point guard / combo guard for the Clippers and is in a more actualized role. He was obviously not very good for the Suns, but like that dude shot 40% from three and can still score like crazy. He just was overpaid. I put him 60th. He finished 89th, 29 spot difference. And then basically every other player besides those two and Dame, funnily enough, I have above the consensus by a lot is all defensive guys, are all guys who are really good defensive players, or I think are better on that end of the floor maybe than their offense. And I was surprised by their ranking. So here's every other player that I ranked 8+ spots better than where they finished. Tari Eason, Paul George, Miles Bridges, Drew Holiday, Devin Vassell. All those guys were 20+ spots for me above where they finished. Some of these just I can't even, like Paul George at 76. Same thing with Embiid. Like, be for real. Like, if he's healthy, come on. Drew Holiday I had at 58. He finished 78. That one surprised me, although he obviously had a down year last year. Vassell was out of the top 100. That's crazy to me. Dylan Brooks was out of top 100. That's crazy to me, but we'll get to him in a second. Like, some of these just blew my mind. Dylan Brooks was my next player that I ranked way higher than everybody else. Dame I ranked higher than everybody else. Porzingis I ranked higher than everybody else. DeJounte Murray I had higher than everybody else. Tumani Kamara, Draymond Green, Aaron Nesmith, Andrew Wiggins, Evan Mobley I had 7. That was way higher than anybody else. All of them. And then the others that snuck in were Lauri Markkanen, pedigree of being awesome, but was not awesome last year. Zion, same thing. DeJounte Murray, who's very good, but is injured. And then a couple sneaky surprises. Anthony Simons and CJ McCollum, where I ranked them higher than anybody else and had a bigger gap there. They don't really follow the theme here, but I guess I just still believe in some level of like, yeah, someone's got to score kind of players. But what this taught me is I might be a little too low on guys who have some toward the rim scoring pop, but are like okay defenders. Like if you can get to the basket, you have some value. If you can create some gravity on offense, you have some value, even if you have some weak points. Like all of the players that I underrated compared to the consensus are all like good gravity-based offensive players, but aren't like awesome, except for Norm Powell, but aren't like awesome offensive players, I would say, or all have clear holes in their offensive game. And I think that I was focused too much on the weaknesses for those guys, whereas the guys I ranked better than everybody else, I was so focused on the strength of their defense. And I think that's been a theme for me like my whole life of basketball evaluation is good to useful defenders. I put a premium on them. Like you can be if you can guard, you can be on the floor, even if your offense isn't particularly good, especially in this era of as Ja Morant called them, the pigeon era, where, you know, teams are so into picking on weaknesses in a player's game. I feel like weak defenders, especially in the postseason, just become so tough to have on the floor, right? And so weak offensive players are obviously still tough to have on the floor too. They don't get guarded, they clog up the spacing, but there are creative ways to use them, and the ball is what is being reacted to, and they can touch the ball, whereas in the defensive end, they're not touching the ball. So this doesn't like surprise me given the history of how I feel about players, but I was surprised by some of the specifics. I was very surprised to see, for example, me be higher on Dame than most people. And I was also very surprised to see me be lower on everybody than Aaron Gordon. And Chet honestly surprised me a little bit too. I've never been as high on Chet as most, but that much of a gap surprised me given that he is a good defender, even though sometimes he does get punked in ways that surprised me. Lou Dort, I felt the same way. Maybe the Thunder, I'm just jarred by their operation of the finals. Anyway, you can see the whole list on our Locked On Network feeds. I'll have several posts about it on this one. There's an Aaron Nesmith minute video where I explain how he can move up the list next year, but really fun exercise. It's I like the process of top 100 lists more when I'm involved, and then I could compare my own analysis to everybody else's. But I actually think the Pacers players were mostly fair, but a little too low given what they've done, given who they've beaten in the postseasons, and given where they're headed. And I think there will be more guys eligible for this list next year. Thank you guys so much for listening today. Comment, Tony, here's why you're dumb and got this wrong, or here's why you're so awesome and got this right. I don't expect any of those. But let me know who you think should move up or down from the Pacers side of this. We'll be back tomorrow doing power forward season previews for the Pacers. I apologize for the long run of no guest episodes. It's just how the scheduling worked out. But Thursday and Friday, we'll have guests. They're already booked up. They're already talked about topics in place. And so we're back and rolling. And then, man, the season's just right around the corner. Thank you guys so much for listening today. You can find me on social media at Tony R. East and this podcast at Locked On Pacers. Back tomorrow talking more Pacers. Till then, everybody, have a wonderful day.